Never in a million years did I ever think I would be sitting here making a YouTube video on life insurance underwriting. I mean, how boring and basic and uninteresting, if that's even a word, can that possibly be? But after 15 years of working with clients to help them develop a well rounded financial plan, which in a lot of cases will require having some sort of life insurance, I've realized that the underwriting part is actually a crucial step in the whole process. And so here's why. When people are going through the process, I believe, tend to think that they can just go online and purchase a policy just like they would with either a stock or a bond or an ETF or a mutual fund, say at Fidelity or Vanguard, that it's just pretty basic and simple and easy. And it can be, but you actually have to go through a process in order to actually buy the insurance policy, which is called underwriting, and actually get approved by the insurance carrier before they even will issue a policy and provide you the protection that you're looking for. So in today's video, which is the final part of the life insurance video series that we put together, this is part 4. I'm going to break down how life insurance actually works, what you need to know going into it, and how to actually prepare so that you can get the best results. And so with all of that being said, let's get into it. Reason that I've seen that it can get tricky for clients is that many clients tend to just get frustrated by the entire process. It is long, or it can be long. It can be annoying. It can be frustrating. And in some situations, the results aren't what the client actually was expecting. For example, maybe you feel totally healthy and there's nothing wrong with you. Or maybe you're on a common medication that a lot of people take. Maybe it's cholesterol, maybe it's high blood pressure. It's a variety of things. Maybe it's anxiety type medications. And like I said, maybe there's nothing at all wrong, or in your eyes, there's nothing specifically wrong, but the insurance company will look at it a totally different way. And that's where a lot of the disconnect sometimes happens. That's the main reason that I wanted to make this video, is because it is just so important to understand how this process works and how to put yourself in the best position possible. So that way you put the actual protection in place for your family, which is the reason that you're doing this in the first place. So let's go back and reset the table. If you remember in part 1, which I kind of coined as the most important part of the life insurance underwriting process, is trying to figure out and determine how much coverage you should have. We talked about how to go through all of that math and make that ultimate determination. But once you figure that out, we then go into what we talked about in video 2 and video 3, which is really more on the product side, which is figuring out, all right, well, do I want term insurance? Do I want permanent insurance? Do I want a combination? Which type of product do I want? And when you're going through that process of looking at term and permanent insurance and the amount of insurance you actually want, you're going to get a rough estimate or a rough quote as to where that particular insurance agent or financial advisor is going to think that you're going to come out from an underwriting perspective, and how much your annual premiums would be or will be. Once you start the underwriting process, this is how everything works. So how actually are life insurance premiums determined? Well, those premiums are calculated based off of a risk assessment that is done by the insurance carrier. And that's going to consider the applicant's health, their lifestyle, maybe, what type of policy it is, how much. And then insurers are going to use actuarial tables to ultimately determine the medical underwriting and any sort of statistical models to price the policies accordingly. Now, there's really 4 main fundamentals that go into pricing life insurance and what it's going to be based off of. So the first one is age. So the younger you are, the less expensive the policy is going to be, simply because of the fact that you have a low likelihood of dying, assuming that you get one of the top health classes, of course. So the second one would be gender. Females on average pay less than males. Statistically speaking, they live longer than males. They live somewhere between 5 to 7 years longer than males. So that's why those premium prices tend to be less. They also will want to know if you're a smoker or not a smoker. So this is a big one. I mean, most people I find these days don't smoke cigarettes. However, if you do, you could expect those premiums to be anywhere from 2 to 4 times more than what they would be if you were a non-smoker. And then lastly is your health and medical history. So this is where everything sort of comes up when you're going through this process. So the insurance carrier is going to evaluate your medical history, and they'll make that determination by going through a couple of different steps in the process, which we're going to get into in a minute. But this is really like a big factor in determining if you're going to be approved for the policy, if you're going to get declined, how much the premium is going to be. It's going to be more expensive, less expensive, etc. So life insurance companies use health classes to determine and categorize applicants based off of their overall health and risk level to that particular carrier. And these classifications directly impact the final premiums that you'll pay. Most insurers use anywhere from 4 to 6 health classes, but I've seen some carriers use anywhere from 12 to 13, and it can get kind of confusing. A lot of carriers will use terms like ultra or preferred plus or super preferred. So it gets very confusing. In a lot of situations when I'm with a client, I'll just kind of try to make it easy for them and say, hey, you fell in the best health class or the second best health class. There's just so many different terms that these carriers use, and everyone is a little bit different. There is something also called table ratings, which is then falling below those initial health classes that an insurance carrier will basically approve you at. And so once you fall into table ratings, that's when pricing really starts to get very expensive. Now, the process. How do you actually qualify for these health classes? So it's a multi-step process, which starts with an application. You'll provide your social security number, your date of birth, your driver's license information, and then you're going to answer a series of medical questions, a lot of yes, no type questions. You'll have to disclose any sort of medications that you're taking. You'll have to disclose if you do any sort of hazardous activity like scuba diving, skydiving, drive race cars. I mean, all kinds of things like that. You'll have to disclose that. They'll also ask about your family medical history and possibly want to dive into that a little bit further. So this application process used to be done by paper, of course, but the insurance carriers finally started to digitize themselves probably in the late, anywhere from like 2015 to 2020, you started to see it become more and more prevalent that there would be an e-signature type application, which just makes the whole process a lot easier. But once you fill in and answer all of those questions and get that initial information to the insurance carrier, here's what happens next. Traditionally speaking, you'll have to do a medical exam, which is basically where a third-party examiner will be scheduled to either come to your home or maybe you go to a specific location. And it's a 20-minute process. It's generally not a big deal, but basically what they'll do is they will draw blood from you. They will take your blood pressure. They might ask you to step on a scale. You'll have to pee in a cup and, ask a couple of other medical type questions. But with all that being said, some carriers have started to use an algorithmic type underwriting process where they can take a lot of the information that not only you've submitted to them via the application process, but also things that they've found out, which I'm going to go into in a minute, to come up with an approximate health class and approval process just to make everything easier for a particular applicant. And also what I've seen lately is that in lieu of having to go through the whole medical examination process, carriers have started to use medical records from maybe your last visit to your primary care physician and look at those records instead of making you go through the whole process of giving blood, peeing into a cup and all of that stuff. But this is very important too. You want to ask the insurance agent ahead of time the best way to kind of prep for one of these exams. I mean, you don't want to be going out drinking the night before. You don't want to eat heavy foods. You want to just have a very clean, simple diet. I mean, that's really the best practices. A lot of water, not drink coffee, and really do the exam first thing in the morning. Also, you don't want to do anything like in terms of heavy weightlifting or anything like that the day before, because that actually will throw off all of your blood levels. So just keep that in mind as well. So besides the medical exam, here are the other key components. So first off, they're going to do a script check. And what that is they're going to take your information and they're going to basically put that information through a database, which is going to let the insurance carrier know of any prescriptions that you have filled over a specific period of time. And this will help them assess your medical history, or maybe even pick up on something that you didn't disclose. Because maybe you took an antibiotic at some point, maybe you were suffering from allergies and you went to your doctor, and it's just not registering on your end as anything to really be sort of concerned about. So you didn't disclose it. They will do that check and then come back to you with any sort of questions that they might have. So be sure to disclose everything that you've been prescribed and that you filled over a specific period of time. Could be 3 years, 5 years. Ask the insurance agent or advisor that you're working with. The other thing is they'll do a DMV check where they'll ping your driver's license against the database, look for any sort of tickets or any violations that you might have and that you didn't necessarily disclose. I actually had a situation at one point, this many years ago, where a client didn't disclose that they got picked up on a DUI. And so that came up on the records, and that obviously wasn't a good situation for that particular client. But what they're looking for here is just a history of reckless driving and speeding tickets, and which can ultimately lead to higher premiums. They also will ping your information against the MIB, which is the Medical Information Bureau. And, that's effectively like a credit bureau that all the insurance carriers basically compile a database, which allows the insurance companies to verify your information that you've provided on the application. They're not pulling your medical records, but basically if you've applied for life insurance in the past and maybe didn't disclose that, on the application or to the advisor or agent that you're working with, they're going to pick up on it. And so it's not that it's a bad thing, but they just want to make sure that if you have applied, that you've disclosed it and you disclosed what the actual end result was. They also want to protect themselves from you going to 5 different carriers, which would be a total pain in the ass from a application process. And so that you're not being insured for way too much insurance relative to what your net worth is. So it's really a way for the insurance carriers to protect themselves and share some very basic information between each other, which ultimately helps them in the underwriting process. And then lastly, and probably the most frustrating, is medical records. If we go through this process again, right, you filled out the application, you might have taken a medical exam, they looked and did a script check on you, they did a DMV check, they also pinged your information against the MIB Bureau. Maybe you did also a phone interview with the insurance carrier. Sometimes they do that. If they determine that they want to see more information, they might write to your doctors and look for the medical records over a specified period of time, which is typically a couple of years. It's basically to give them a full picture of your overall health history. And in a lot of cases, it brings out things that, again, maybe you just didn't disclose because you forgot about it, didn't think it was that important. It was maybe a concern at one point, but it never materialized. But the more they know, then the better they can help determine what the risk level is for them and determine what your actual rate can be. But it is a frustrating process, because they have to write to the doctor's offices that, again, you have doctors at, and then wait for those records to come in. Sometimes it can be quick as a week or two. And then sometimes it could be several weeks. Even though the insurance carrier is actually paying for those records to that doctor's office, they're not necessarily in a hurry to get those medical records to you. So sometimes, I've had to have situations where I've said to a client, hey, can you call your doctor's office and let them know you're applying for life insurance so they can send the records. Nowadays, there's much more information available on a patient portal where you can go and you can download a lot of your records. So sometimes that helps. But also sometimes some doctor's offices actually have a third-party company that they use to scan and store all the records. And when that's the case, that could take even longer. But rest assured, at the end of the day, the records will most likely come through. And then it's up to the insurance carrier to go through those records and determine what's there. And in some cases, they ask to even see more information. But again, you just have to think of it from their perspective. They're just doing their job, making sure that they're not putting their company at any sort of unnecessary risk. It's also frustrating too, and I'll give this kind of warning ahead of time, that sometimes when people go and they do their annual physical, they disclose information to the doctor, and that doctor might write it down or they might interpret it in a certain way. And that could also impact the insurance underwriting, which is extremely frustrating and it's extremely annoying. I've seen situations where clients got kind of labeled as being an alcoholic, or there was a medical condition that they wrote down that didn't, or the client says that didn't occur when they went on their visit. So this is probably the most frustrating part of the process because it can take the longest. There can be a lot of information that can be misconstrued. Just try to work